Green Harbor Waterfront Lodging is nestled in a woodland setting on a picturesque ocean inlet. Green Harbor offers a family waterfront vacation. Enjoy our private boating beach with dock, rowboats, and paddle boats, oversized heated outdoor pool, and kiddie pool. Relax in our waterfront and beachside accommodations. 548-4747 or gogreenharbor.com. Carlson Printing for all your printing needs. 508-548-7303 or toll free at 1-800-696-7303. Our email address is carlsonprinting@aol.com. Carlson Printing for all your printing needs.
Hi, welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Monday, January 8th. We're going to go straight into executive session under General Laws, Chapter 38, Section 21A3, to discuss the resolution of all turbine litigation, and also under General Laws 38, 21A6, to discuss status update on potential purchase of Liberty Green project site. As chair, along with making the motion, I state that to not go into executive session would prejudice the town's position on both of these issues, and we will return to open session.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call?
Brown, aye.
Patterson, aye.
Moran, aye.
Jones, aye.
Thank you. Cool. Welcome back to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Monday, January 8, 2018. We've just returned from executive session, and we will now do the Pledge of Allegiance. If you please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I don't believe there are any proclamations today, but we do have recognition. Ms. Braga?
Yes, just unfortunately a sad recognition, but one that I know a lot of folks in town, I know they've approached me and asked me about it, and some of the other board members as well. But just want to keep in our thoughts and prayers the young girl and her family. There's, I'm sure lots of folks had read about the accident with the dog attack, and I know that we are just really wishing the best for that young girl, and that this town will be there to support them along the way. So just a moment of recognition for that family.
Thank you. We now have time for public comment. If there's anyone in the audience who'd like to speak for 2 minutes on a subject that's not on the agenda, please come forward, state your name. Hello, sir.
Hi, Larry Backman, Reynolds Street, Mara Vista. Speaking for myself, I want to alert the selectmen to the fact that a number of grinder pump alarms went off over the past 4 or 5 days. DPW and Amy Lowell are aware of it, but it seems that some part of the grinder pumps froze in the cold. That's problem one. That's distressing. I believe she's on it with the vendor. What's more distressing is I know of at least 2 people who called F.R. Mahoney, who is the town vendor, to support those, and they were told that they didn't support it. In each case, the individuals contacted a contractor who came out, basically put a hairdryer down into the pump to heat up whatever was frozen, and the individuals incurred the cost of that. So I'm hoping that the town acknowledges whatever is going on, addresses it with both E1 and Mahoney, and in the case of people who incurred expense on their own as a result of town machinery failing on their property, that it's addressed to them.
Very important. Thank you for the information. Much appreciated that you came down to give us that. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you.
I think you skipped announcements, and I don't know that we have any.
Any announcements? I think I did. We don't. Okay. That was a premonition. Yes.
Just new.
First item under summary of actions, we have license to approve the application for a special one-day all-alcohol liquor license, Falmouth Theater Guild Highfield Theater at 58 Highfield Drive for January 26, 27, 28, February 2nd, February 3rd, and February 4th, 2018.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have a vote to approve the Andrews Farm Conservation Restriction, which has been continued to a future date. And further, we have a vote to adopt the fiscal year 2019 budget. Did any member of the board have a question that wasn't covered already?
No.
I would move approval of the, that we adopt the fiscal year 2019 budget and send it to the Finance Committee for their approval.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank
And
you.
with thanks for a great job, I'd say.
Very
Thank you,
good.
members of the board.
Very good job.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have social media policy, sexual harassment, and violence, in the workplace presentation and report. Denise, I guess, would be on her way?
Yes, she should be here in momentarily, and I know she has a PowerPoint to present, so.
Sure. Why don't we skip over to minutes and see if we can get those done?
Sure.
We have the public session of December 18, 2017.
Just one correction. It was quoted that Selectman Jones attended the coastal conference and the resiliency stakeholders, but it was the other Doug.
Other Doug.
I mentioned it to Jennifer before the meeting.
Other Doug did it. Sam?
Yes, on page 4, about a third of the way up from the bottom where it says, Mr. Jones noted the town is ahead of a curve on the federal and state governments may require in the future. In the next sentence, it says, Ms. Carmichael noted a key piece. That should be Ms. Valiello.
Any other changes? Okay, I'll take a motion on that one.
Move approval?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, next we have the executive session for December 18, 2017.
I move approval not to release.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's the first session?
That would be the
First, session number 1.
And then
Session
session number 2.
I move approval not to release.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
She's on her way. She'll be here within 2 minutes.
Okay.
And thank you for getting the minutes out quickly recently. I appreciate that.
Do we have time to announce the charter review process?
Let's do that.
Yeah. Mr. Duffy, do you want to take the podium? Thank you. This is something we've been talking about for quite a while. A lot of folks have been looking forward. Could you give us an overview of the kind of charter review process that we are looking to?
Madam Chairman, I'm Frank Duffy, Town Council, and yes, it is that time again. It's now 7 years, like there's a process that the charter dictates that we review the charter every 7 years. The last time we did it was in 2011-12. The municipal charter is basic. It's your basic organization of the town government. I compare it to the Constitution of the United States or the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's a document which creates the body politic and gives form to municipal government. Now, it is distinguishable from the municipality's ordinances and bylaws because a number of times when we've had previous public meetings at the Charter Review Committee, people come in and they think it's an appropriate time to amend the bylaws or something like that. It's not. The Charter Review focuses solely on the charter. So the bylaws of the town regulate routine transactions. They do things like public safety, zoning, municipal services, public health, commerce, trade, so on and so forth. The Charter Review Committee is not going to be involved in any of that. It's going to look solely at the charter. So if you take a look at the charter, I'm just going to go through. There's 9 chapters to the charter, just kind of give the public a little idea of what the document actually covers. The first thing the charter does is create the form of government. In Falmouth, we have a form of government known as a representative town meeting, Board of Selectmen, town manager form of government. That is the form of government we have right now. When we go through the charter review process and when the final report is submitted to the town clerk, when the Board of Selectmen acts upon it, when it goes to town meeting and then to the voters, we're still going to have the same form of government. We're going to have a representative town meeting, Board of Selectmen, town manager form of government. The other items that the charter takes care of, it describes and provides some details about the representative town meeting. It provides details about the Board of Selectmen and defines the powers and duties and responsibilities of the Board of Selectmen. It also provides for the powers and duties and responsibilities of elected boards and elected officers. The town manager under the Falmouth Home Rule Charter is given extensive powers and duties, particularly with respect to the management of town departments and with respect to personnel. We also have a provision in the charter for elections and recall, which has hardly been used, if it's been used at all, but it's appropriate to be there. The Home Rule Charter provides for appointed boards and defines their duties and responsibilities and organization. And then we have a provision of the charter which isn't talked about very much, but it's observed regularly because it details the financial provisions of the town of Falmouth that we have to deal with. So those are the type of issues that the Charter Review Committee is going to be looking at. There is a difference between a charter commission and a charter review committee. A charter commission basically creates a new charter or substantially revises an existing charter. In order to create a charter commission, 15% of the registered voters in town must file a petition with the town clerk. There's an election, and members of a charter commission are elected. We went through that process in 1991. All of the other reviews have been charter review committees. There have not been charter commission. Only a charter commission may propose a change in either relating in any way to the composition, mode of election or appointment, or terms of office of the legislative body, that's the representative town meeting, the mayor or city manager, or the board of selectmen, in the case of a town, and the town manager. So a charter review committee's powers are limited. It cannot invade the powers that are reserved exclusively to a charter commission. So what the Charter Review Committee will do will be to focus on amendments to the existing charter intended to make it a more effective document, but it cannot make any substantive changes to the form of government. Now, the process. The Board of Selectmen have the authority to appoint a Charter Review Committee. The Charter Review Committee will then have approximately 1 year in which it is mandated to hold public hearings, take comments from the public and from elected officials, from appointed officials, and from any other appropriate source, consider what amendments should be appropriately recommended to the charter, and submit that report to the town clerk. The town clerk forwards this report to the Board of Selectmen, who then must, within 4 months, hold public hearings on the proposed amendments, and then at the end of a 6-month period, they must make recommendations on the amendments submitted by the Charter Review Committee. To the extent the Board of Selectmen approve of the recommended amendments, they are then put on the warrant for the next town meeting. And if town meeting approves them, and a 2/3 vote is required at town meeting to approve a charter amendment submitted by a Charter Review Committee, the amendments are then submitted to the Attorney General for a determination of legality. And if they're determined to be legal by the Attorney General, they must go on the ballot. Each charter amendment is a separate question on the ballot at the next town election. In a memo to you, I had proposed that if you were to appoint a Charter Review Committee by, say, April of 2018, that they would have 1 year till April of 2019 to finish their work and submit the report to the town clerk. The goal would be to have the Board of Selectmen conduct their hearings and make their recommendations in time to be included in the warrant for the November 2019 town meeting. Then, if the Attorney General approves, they could go on the ballot, and the voters could vote them at the May 2020 town election. Now, I pointed out that there is a 2/3 vote required by town meeting to approve a charter amendment. When it goes to the voters, it's only a majority. Previous charter review committees in Falmouth have had either 7, 9, or 11 members. I would not recommend going beyond 11. I think you really would like kind of a tight focus group. I think it's important that anybody on the committee have a basic understanding of government, because the Charter Review Committee tends to dive right into its work and get involved right away. And as I point out, the learning curve is short and steep. I also recommend that you consider having an appropriate budget for the Charter Review Committee. There's a fair amount of administrative work that goes along with this process. I've asked the town finance director, Jennifer Petit, to look at how much we spent the last time in 2011, 2012, and let us know, so we might use that as some kind of a guideline for going forward. But you'll need a recording secretary at every one of the public meetings, and of course they're all going to be public under the open meeting law. This committee creates rather extensive records. I have a couple of fairly good-sized boxes on just the last process that we went through.
What are your top 3 changes that you have appreciated from the most recent charter review?
I can't remember which ones we did. We've done a lot over the years, but I kind of mixed up which Charter Review Committee did what. But it's quite amazing when you start to talk to people and you bring in department heads and you bring in selectmen and you bring in people who work with the charter. They have a lot of ideas for improving it. even though we have been through a charter review process 3 times before, I'm not discounting the fact that the 4th one might think of something that nobody else thought of before. So I think it's going to be a very interesting exercise when we go through.
It's a nice optimistic view, Doug.
Would the Charter Review Committee be the initial start for possibility of recommending a Charter Review Commission, or is that a separate process?
No, it can be. Now, the last time we went through the charter review process in 2011 and 2012, a number of people came to our meetings and submitted proposals which clearly were beyond our authority to include in our final recommendation. People came in and said, well, we should become a city, or we should change the Board of Selectmen, or change the town manager, or change the town meeting, or do something very significant. We had some people that came in and suggested that we adopt the form of government that's appropriate for towns in some other states. Our reaction to that, we said, well, we can't really do this, but we're going to submit a supplemental report which would include all of the ideas that were presented to us that we felt we couldn't act upon, that were beyond our authority, and I think we did that. Now, what happened to those ideas, I can't really tell you, but we did take them in and we did note them in our minutes, and we did put them in, not the final report, but as an appendix to the final report.
Is that available on the website currently?
I don't know.
It would be great if that were on there, if we're soliciting members coming up, and maybe on the town website, on the first page or something, looking for volunteers for a charter review committee,
Okay,
anything
very good.
appropriate.
Now, the charter review committee, previous one, I'm going to just mention, I don't know how the new one will act, but the previous one met, I think, every 2 weeks. And it met in the late afternoon, probably from 4 to maybe 6, with the idea that you kind of catch some of the afternoon people and the evening people at the same time. And keeping in mind that we're also interviewing all department heads and so forth who are really available during the daytime hours. I don't think the last charter review committee was televised. In fact, I'm pretty sure it wasn't, because we usually met down in the old water room. And this one, I don't know if FCTV is going to televise it. They certainly can if they want to, but it's an interesting process. I'm kind of glad, I think we should all be glad that the charter provides for such a frequent review of 7 years. But that's where we are. I would suggest, in fact, I urge that you have this in place and up and running by April. I think we need that time. The Charter Review Committee needs at least a year to get its work done. And then your process of holding hearings and making final recommendations is going to take some time also. And remember, you have to have everything ready by September of 19 to put on the warrant for November of 19. So you really kind of, it's not a hurry-up process, but it's going to move along rather fast.
Can I just ask, when we put out a call, for applicants, did we have them apply in the same way that individuals apply?
Yes, and you interviewed them,
Okay.
just like any other board or commission where you're the appointing authority.
Okay.
Sam?
Yeah, I was going to suggest adding to your request that we put the last charter commission, I guess, deliberation on online. I think all 3 of the ones, since we adopted the charter, should be online so people can go and actually see what has historically been considered. And that's a foundation for them to decide whether there's some new initiative that should be considered. So I think the history would be important, and the easiest way for people to access it is online.
You're not suggesting the whole 2 big boxes, but
No.
maybe just
No.
a separate...
Their final reports.
Well, I think what he's suggesting is that each charter review committee submits a final report of recommendations. That would be the document I think Mr. Patterson's referring to. And I actually would intend to get copies of those and distribute them at the very first meeting of the charter review committee and tell everybody, here's what's been done before, so you don't feel that you have to reinvent this wheel.
Great, and so probably we should start interviews, I don't know, optimistically end of February, so.
If we left
Sure.
it open for a month.
Yeah, I think it's going to take several sessions, probably.
Right. No, I just mean the period for folks to apply, if it were to
Right.
happen whenever we put it up. And then a 30-day period, and then we interview February, March, and we'd have it by April.
Makes
Does that
sense.
make sense?
So should we decide the size and announce it's going to happen tonight?
I think that's a great idea. Is that sort of a
I move that
motion?
we start the charter review process by asking for applicants for the charter review committee of a 9-member board.
Second?
I agree.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Thanks, Frank, very comprehensive. Appreciate it. Next on the agenda, we have the social media policy, sexual harassment and violence in the workplace presentation report. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Denise Coleman. As your personnel director, you had asked me to provide you with an overview of our social media policy and then also a brief overview of our sexual harassment and workplace violence policy. So, I'm going to start. So the social media policy is a new policy, and so I'm going to give you a little more information regarding that since it is new. And we recently just rolled this out to the majority of our employees, the unions. So we'll talk about the definition briefly, the scope, the purpose, and some general guidelines. And then we'll also talk about the sexual harassment and workplace violence, a brief overview. So I think we can all agree that social media really has transformed how a lot of people communicate today. And what I've done, I mean, most common examples would be Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. But what I've done is I've actually put the formal definition that's in our policy that you have before you up on the screen. So the scope of the policy is an employment policy, is directly to employees and contractors. And really the whole purpose of the policy is to promote acceptable usage. And what we found is we broke out the term social media into two different categories. There's the non-town sponsored social media, which would be personal usage. And we note that access and posting to social media and networking sites for personal use during work hours and on town equipment is prohibited. And then we also have the town-sponsored social media. And that's limited to those who have a legitimate business need. So, go ahead.
Can I ask a question on the scope? I mean, we consider members of boards and committees to be employees. They would be wrapped up in this as well, correct?
This policy, because the town is focusing on employment matters, specifically that they have authority to actually enforce, it is for employees and contractors.
So compensated employees.
Right. But good question.
Yeah, I think it is us.
So the town-sponsored social media, just to give you an overview, there are several departments that are currently using the town social media. So that would be like the police and the fire, recreation. They're promoting their programs through the social media, which is a great tool. The basic philosophy that I wanted to get across today is that, you know, we might have new tools, and we'll continue to get new electronic tools, but the same rules still apply. So we want to remind our employees that any content that they post can't violate these policies: sexual harassment, protected class, the town's computer use policy, and violence in the workplace. And the reason why it's so important to remind them of this is because this form of communication could have a definite intersection in between employment and personal. And so that's why it's important to remind our employees of these rules. And so just to dive a little bit deeper in terms of those rules, I'll quote a few from the policy. So online postings that harass, threaten, or intimidate other town employees is expressly prohibited. Online postings that disparage others based on race, national sex, or national origin, sex, sexual orientation, age, disability, or religion are not permitted under any circumstances. We ask that our employees maintain confidentiality at all times, and this is regardless of the time and place that it's posted, again, because of that intersection. So some further guidelines. We always remind our employees not to let social media interfere with the performance of their regular duties. that they remain respectful at all times. And I've given examples in your policy that are more detailed around what that really means. To be honest and accurate, so if you post something and it is incorrect, we ask that you correct it. That you don't post on behalf of the town without town authorization. And also that the use of personal email addresses should be used for non-town sponsored email or social media. Again, maintain that confidentiality. And then we also remind everyone to revisit town policies. And I'm going to revisit just two of them briefly because they're the two that you had requested, which was the sexual harassment and the workplace violence.
Can I just?
Sure.
Go ahead, Megan.
So, one thing that I've noticed, and it doesn't really fall in the realm of the town's employees posting, but say for the Falmouth Police Department, you know, they'll post some bit of news on their Facebook page, and then clearly they don't control what people write. They do control, they can delete. And I'm just wondering, you know, I know this is an evolving policy, but I could see there being, you know, something that's problematic that a non-town employee posts. You know, some of the things that Falmouth Police are reporting on are sometimes sensitive issues, and I mean, you know, I've read through some of the comments that are really, frankly, egregious sometimes when you're talking about, you know, somebody overdosing, and then you have this chain of comments that are just, you know, and again, it's not a town employee, it's a public, you know, a private individual posting their opinion, but it's on a town-sponsored Facebook page. And I'm not asking for an answer because I know we're moving, it's always a moving target, but I think it's just something to consider. You know, it's always, you know, create that Facebook page, it's like a whole nother job for someone to you know, monitor it, but I can see, and I have seen, where some of those conversations have spun off in directions that I know would definitely not be sanctioned by the town, certainly don't represent the police department's opinion, or even, you know, what the original post was meant to highlight.
So Megan, you bring up a good point, and it's conversations that I've had with the chief and with the other town officials that have these sites. It is you know, an evolving process, and we're learning as we go, and we're trying to manage it to the best of our ability. No, we don't have one person that manages all the content of these sites, and so what I think you'll see is that this policy will probably evolve over time. You know, I'm sure I'll be coming back to our unions with, you know, additional terms and conditions as we learn more about, you know, just really how this all fits into the legal end of things.
Sam, please.
I'm going to go back to my original question about what you meant by employee, because it strikes me that when you have active committees like the rec committee, that many times the volunteers are the ones that are writing the content that goes into this social media site and its posts and what have you. It seems like this document needs to be broader in its scope. I understand that the bargaining units need to be involved for the sake of town employees, but in order to set up a town policy that has some guidelines, I think it's got to go broader than just the employees, you know, the town staff.
Right.
So when you say it's limited in that way, I think we need a guiding document, even if it doesn't have any legal teeth.
I think you bring up a good point, Sam. This is very much focused on employment and the consequences of what occurs if it's not followed, which is, you know, we have to manage it through a process which may include disciplinary action. And so that's where you draw the line with these volunteers and the other committees. And I think, you know, it might be helpful at some point to explore maybe just an overall guideline for your volunteers and board members.
And Frank, maybe you might want to speak to whether the board could, in a future agenda, put a policy for volunteer committees together. Maybe that could be the subject of a upcoming agenda.
Madam Chair?
Hold on one second.
I just going to say, I think this is great guidelines and advice for anyone. I don't see why we couldn't hold volunteers to the same level of responsibility, and the consequence for them would be losing the same job. It's a volunteer job, but at the same time, if you have someone acting inappropriately and misrepresenting the town, I think it's appropriate that they might be
When it's elected
in
boards,
trouble.
it gets a little more complicated, because if you apply it to us, for instance,
Right.
which I would hope we could apply it to, but we can't be fired by this policy.
I
It
don't
would
think,
be
the way I read it, it says, I think we could.
Frank, I wonder
I don't
if you
think
would
we
take
can't
the
be
podium
fired.
and
Yeah, 'cause we're
answer a
elected,
couple of
right.
these questions, and please, Peter.
Yeah, if I could, I just wanted to, I don't want to discourage necessarily the idea of a separate policy for volunteers or guidelines, but I just sort of wanted to make a clarifying comment. That is, at this time, we don't have any official town-sponsored sites that are under the control of volunteers. And we probably want to keep it that way, and that may go a long way to avoiding the issues that you're talking about. Now, a private citizen who happens to be a volunteer on their own social media, that could raise issues, and so that there may still be a reason to have that separate policy, but I just wanted to point out that there really are two different things.
Sure.
So we can have town-sponsored policies that are, the content is all managed by town employees, not by volunteers, and then we can have a separate policy that deals with volunteers and what they do on their own personal social media accounts.
Doug?
The question I had, though, was on the online postings that harass or threaten other people, and it's limited to employees or officials. Is there any reason that couldn't be, that they shouldn't harass or intimidate anybody? It's only protecting other town employees. Are we limited, that we can't, by First Amendment rules or something, we can't stop
Whichever
it?
one is, maybe you two can, be bookends for these questions.
I would hope we could ask
We
that
didn't
our
have a chance
employees.
to rehearse what we're saying, so we're
Right,
kind of
right.
going by.
Well, wouldn't it be?
The first question is to address what Mr. Patterson said, is that members of boards, volunteer boards or appointed town boards, are not town employees. They are considered town employees solely for the purposes of the conflict of interest law, but that's the only reason they're considered town employees. They don't get paid. We really don't have any authority over them. Once you appoint somebody to a town board, they basically have that job for the 3-year term that they're appointed, and it's very difficult to remove somebody. And it's even more difficult to remove somebody for a First Amendment issue where they're exercising their right of free speech. So I think that it probably would be better off to address members of appointed town boards and committees with a policy directed to them and ask for voluntary compliance. Perhaps you could ask them to sign a statement saying, I agree to this, or something like that. But I think to lump them in with paid employees, it probably might cause more difficulty than we can think of right now. Now, you're correct, though, as a member, you're elected officials. You can pretty much do what you want to do, and we can't fire you, or nobody in this room can fire you. The only people that can take care of that would be if they exercise their provisions under the charter to recall you or not re-elect you 3 years at the end of your 3-year term. With paid employees, we have a lot more ability to enforce and discipline.
This brings up a very good point, though. For all of our volunteer committees, it has been a while since each committee has updated what is their purpose, what are the expectations in terms of timing, that kind of thing. It would be very helpful for this issue and general responsibilities in committees for volunteers who might want to join a committee to know what each committee entails. What is the time commitment? I think it might be a good initiative for this board on a different agenda to talk about making requests of the chairs of our current committees in terms of updating, what may be their working operations. And we can include certainly a voluntary request for social media or conduct or those kinds of things that Frank was just raising. Megan?
I was just going to say, I think, the folks who volunteer are, have excellent intentions. They give their time, they give their resources in many cases, not just time, but their talents and otherwise. So I think just bringing a policy that's very clear to their attention to just say, in this role, you are, yes, you're not an employee of the town, but you're representing the town, this particular committee. I think just that awareness is helpful. And I'm not, again, I don't think a lot of the committees have Facebook pages or websites that they're maintaining on their own, so it's somewhat, it's not a burning issue right now, but it may be something that continues to be, maybe something that's more popular as time goes on, and committees may look into doing something like that. So just that awareness, I think, would be helpful for committees to just be able to have that conversation, and they're going to police themselves. I mean,
Right.
that's what the chairs of the committees are for, and you know, if somebody's doing something that doesn't reflect well on the committee, I think that they'll deal with that accordingly, but it's helpful for them to have some material to say, you know, welcome to the committee, this is sort of how we operate, because, you know, it's just a guidepost.
And we can lead that request and, you know, to have committees come up with that. Doug and then Sam?
So maybe then, when you send that email and ask for these updates on, you know, what's going on with these committees, maybe you could just make a mention that please take note of the social media policy, and we ask for voluntary compliance. Because really, it's not like it's censorship, it's just good guidelines.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, this body put together a committee handbook. It might be a good time to take a look at it and revise it, or put something in about this issue. And it's a rather impressive document because it contains a lot of useful information about a whole lot of relevant subjects.
I think that would be a good idea to take a look at updating it as you suggest, and also to make it more available and make sure all the chairs are aware of its availability. Sam?
Yeah, I just want to say that we have diverse cultures in this country, and people have different behavioral expectations. So I think it's actually worthwhile to have a guiding document that says, these are our expectations, and they're common to the town. This is what we think constructive civil discourse is all about, and not just leave it to people's individual discretions, which tend to get caught up and editorialized tremendously in emotional situations. So I think there is a real value to having a policy that goes out to all committees and boards and commissions as well. Because it's just an expectation, this is what constructive civil discourse is all about.
Thank you. Denise, did you want to finish your?
Sure. Thank you, Frank.
I think the question that Doug last had was about the difference between, the distinction between harassment of an employee, another employee, and harassment of an individual. I think he had asked the question.
Right. So we know that from an employment standpoint, discriminatory remarks, harassment, sexual harassment, those things are unlawful, and we have a policy, and I'll review those with you momentarily. And then we have what I think you're describing as a behavior that is disrespectful, unprofessional, and really unacceptable. But in terms of how that would fall into the social media policy, I think you really have to take each situation individually. It's very difficult to be able to just catch a net and have it fit every scenario. But the point is, we're trying to promote a respectful environment, and we have one. And this is just reminders of that.
Can I do? I was just going to say, I think, and I also think the distinction is that the town's not really in a position to police the private behavior if it doesn't fall within the realm of what's happening in the workplace.
So that intersection of the personal and employment types of behaviors.
And as you said, it's very fact-specific, and certainly that, if they're harassing or intimidating, we have another agency, down the road that someone can complain to and let them know, and the police would handle that, separately.
And that, to extend that same topic, it really confused me when I read the one paragraph at the bottom of page 2 where it says, express only your personal opinions. And it just seems to me that's inviting people to express their opinion rather than just facts or interpretations of regulations, laws, or what have you. I don't understand. That's just an invitation for people to get editorial about their comments on a town website or town social media site.
So there is a difference between the town social media site and the personal site. And the personal site, absolutely, people have the right to their opinion. But when it comes to the town sponsored sites, opinions are that's not the place for the opinions. That's where we want factual information.
Well, that's not clear to me in this
paragraph.
paragraph.
Let's see how it's not clear.
I think he's saying in number 8.
Under number 8, the second paragraph there.
I think it's meant as what you're expressing are only your personal opinions.
Right.
Not, as opponent reads right now, is go ahead and do it.
Right.
That's sort of the implication. You can go ahead and stretch it,
Yes. So if you are going to post and you have an opinion that's personal, that is not on behalf of the town, it's important, the point was, and maybe it's not clear enough, is that we want to make sure that people disclose that they're not a spokesperson for the town, and that they have a personal opinion, and that they have the right to that a personal opinion.
Then just drop that first sentence.
Okay. Well, we can look into that further.
That's a good clarification, so that
Maybe-
it's clear to the public when you're speaking as an individual versus when you're speaking in a representative capacity for your board or for your job. Megan?
I think if you just moved that, I mean, I'm not trying to nitpick, but if you just moved it to, if you're writing about the town, make it clear you're not speaking on behalf of the town and that you're expressing your personal opinions.
I agree.
I think that,
Drop the first two sentences.
Or realign them, yeah.
I think it's just to clarify it so that.
So, just so you're aware, this policy has been delivered and rolled out and bargained with the majority of
So
our
this
employees.
is how it already is.
Now, what I would recommend is, because I do know that we'll end up updating this as time goes on, because we're going to have more and more cases to fall back on, that would be something we could clarify at that time.
Great.
Great. Doug, did you have something?
No, sorry, I just butted in about the realigning the sentences, but.
Great. Okay.
So the last piece of this presentation is the two policies that you had requested that we review briefly, and that's the sexual harassment and the violence in the workplace. And you have both of those policies. I'm going to just briefly read to you a few important things. And so, by definition, sexual harassment is behavior that's unwelcome by an employee, that's personally offensive and undermines morale and/or interferes with the ability of the employee to perform effectively. And I've given you some examples, or the policy gives you examples. I'm going to just name off a few. So, jokes, pictures, inquiries, discussions, comments of a sexual nature, offensive discriminatory remarks, unwelcome and repeated invitations, the traditional quid pro quo, Latin term, this for that. If you perform this sexual favor, you'll get this promotion. All of those things are unacceptable and are forms of harassment. So it does tie in well to the social media, because that's where you've got verbal and electronic gestures and comments. So the policy goes in much more detail. I'm going to read the policy statement just as a reminder, because I know this is an important topic. So sexual harassment is, it's against policy to harass another individual sexually by making unwelcome advances, requests for favors, or other uninvited verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature when submission to such conduct is a term or condition of employment or basis for employment decision. The conduct has a purpose of interfering with individuals' work performance or creates an intimidating, hostile work environment. So that's the snapshot of the 3 or 4 page sexual harassment policy that you have in front of you, which has been in place for a while. And then we also have the violence in the workplace policy. Here, really what we're trying to do is promote a safe and respectable work environment. And violence and threats will not be tolerated, so we remind that to our employees.
And that covers bullying?
A form of that type of behavior, where someone's intimidated or, is feeling uncomfortable. So in closing, I want to let you know that those policies, all of them that I've just talked about, there is a complaint procedure in the policy. We have listed how you go about complaining, and then what we would do is conduct an investigation and ultimately determine the findings and make sure, if we did find that there was a violation, that we correct that behavior. And we make sure that we tell all our employees that any type of involvement with an investigation or a complaint cannot result in any form of retaliation. What we do is we have an acknowledgement when the employees first get hired. They all sign these different policies that I've been reviewing. And then there are certain ones where, although not required, we find it important to remind employees of these policies. So we've got a training coming up in March for sexual harassment. We'll train our department heads and then also our employees. And then also, we have the employees sign and acknowledge these policies annually. That's required by the law, but we go above and beyond to make sure that, we're getting out to people and sharing this important information. And so lastly, I'd just like to say, as we've all just discussed, there will be updates to this policy. I think social media is a great tool if it's used the right way. And because of that intersection, it's just important that we have to remind people of these guidelines and policies.
Great presentation. The board just wanted to discuss the policies, just so the town knows what's available, and so folks feel comfortable reporting and know that there's a process for complaints to be dealt with. Anyone else? Sam?
Just because I've done this before in corporate management, you've named specific people, for instance, under the sexual harassment policy. Well, if one of those people goes on to another job, right, do you send out a copy of this to every employee? Or is there a common site that you refer people to?
It's a good question. We find that we're trying to make ourselves as accessible as possible.
I understand.
And so that's why we list the name. And what will happen is, you talk about, where do these policies go? On our intranet, which is just for the employees, these policies will be posted, and then updates will be made, and they'll know where to go.
Madam Chair, could I just interject? As town manager, I want to thank Denise Coleman for extraordinary work in working with multiple collective bargaining units in assembling this social media policy. And while it may give the impression to some that it's a modest undertaking, believe me, it's considerably complicated. And Denise has done a yeoman's job in assembling this and negotiating it and bringing it to the point that we have now. And having said that, I just want to clarify an important distinction, because as the board knows, we've been talking a little bit about compensated employees to which this policy would apply, and then also volunteers. And I just want to also raise an important distinction. As it relates to this social media policy, which has been negotiated and which will be applying to compensated employees, the town manager has the authority to investigate and to enforce. With regard to anything that applies to town volunteers, members of boards, committees, or commissions, the town manager has absolutely zero authority. So I want to make certain that anyone listening is not in any way confused and may think that if they observe something that they feel is questionable or inappropriate as it relates to board, commission, et cetera, the town manager has no authority in that area at all. This, again, is only for compensated employees and lies within the town manager's purview. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify that and to hear this presentation, and thank you again to Denise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Denise. Thanks.
Next, we have discussion of the state building stretch code as a potential April town meeting warrant article.
I am so sorry, but could I just
Sure.
ask a follow-up question
Sure.
to that, just to clarify? So if someone is on a committee and they're experiencing, say, they're experiencing harassing behavior, what would be the mechanism that we would suggest to them to, I mean, I'm assuming they would, maybe go to the chair, but what mechanism is there for policing that? Policing, I use that as a loose term, but addressing that for committee members.
Certainly, great question, and I'll be asking town council to help me on this one. Frank, I'll be asking to give me a hand on this. The question being if there is an issue with behavior on the part of a member of a volunteer-appointed board or commission member, and a question about that behavior, what is the proper mechanism to proceed with that? I'm certain that it would involve some of what we talked about, which is the internal discipline and dynamics of that committee itself, as presumably overseen by the committee's elected or appointed chair. But if absent that or going beyond that, Frank, I don't know what you might suggest, because I've just noted the town manager has absolutely no authority over town-appointed boards and commissions or committees. and if there are questions, how they should proceed.
Under the charter, you don't. However, the Board of Selectmen could, by motion, give you that authority. But, you know, a member of an elected board, first thing I would think of doing would be to set up a meeting with the chair of the board and the member and bring them in and have a talk. Now, remember that I mentioned earlier that it's very difficult to discipline somebody on an elected board or committee if they say something, if it's a First Amendment issue. But if it's conduct that's not really protected by the First Amendment, then it's open to discipline by removal. So you do have some remedy here.
And I think updating the policies and making them available to the members and the chairs, it really gives the chairs a tool for that situation. And of course, always people, you know, have their civil and criminal rights if it ever would
Sure, and I'm
unfortunately
sure
raise to that level.
Yeah, but I just don't want folks, we have so many individuals who volunteer on committees that I don't want them to think that, you know, these important, I know the policy doesn't apply to them in the same way it does to employees, but obviously conceptually, we want all individuals who volunteer on behalf of the town to feel comfortable and safe when they're engaged in those activities, so.
Have
Absolutely.
something of the same protection.
Yes.
Right.
At least in terms of an expectation.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Frank.
Great,
you.
okay, on to the
Sorry.
stretch code. No, that's fine. Mr. Suso, did you want to kick this off?
Well, yeah, happy to. The selectmen wanted to have a discussion about the potential inclusion on the, an upcoming April town meeting warrant of consideration for adoption of the stretch code. And the board may recall, it was many years ago that this was initially considered and declined at that time, to my understanding. I was not town manager at the time. Declined at that time by town meeting. And Megan Amsler, who's chairing the Energy Committee, I know has had made some contact and recommendation, and I believe there is a PowerPoint on this for this to trigger the board's discussion and further review.
Thanks, Ms. Amps.
Megan.
Welcome.
So many Megans.
You have to use the microphone, though, because of it. Sure, yep.
Let me know if you need a hand finding it.
Thank you. I saw a clicker.
Up on the podium.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much for having us in here tonight. This is we're the Megans here from the Energy Committee. And I know we brought this up to your attention when we gave our annual report on November 20th. And so really wanted to thank you very much for having us back to talk specifically about the adoption of the stretch code potentially, and the potential for putting it on the spring warrant for town meeting. Oop. How do you get this thing to go? Thank you. I hit the clicker to go. Is it on the bottom here? This arrow, I hit that and it's it.
That should be right, and sometimes sometimes it just doesn't want to behave. Let's see.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. All right, so we just wanted to quickly give you an overview to help you understand that we are not the first by any means to explore becoming a green community. And this is the most up-to-date slide that I could find off of the Department of Energy Resources website that indicates this was as of December 2017. There are now 210 communities within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that have green community designation. And on our little sandbar here, we have Provincetown, Truro, Wellfleet, and Mashpee. So there is certainly some precedent in our region, as well as on the south coast and over on Martha's Vineyard. And you can clearly see the rest of the state is quite green. So let's see if I can do this again. There we go. So this, Megan is actually an architect, and thought that together we could sort of go over, and she has far more expertise on this than I, but just to sort of give you, if we were to do the stretch code versus not do the stretch code, sort of some of the things that are required and some of the things that are the same, given the new International Energy Conservation Code of 2016. So I don't think...
Before we get to that,
Yeah, absolutely.
can you just give a headline of why do we want to be a green community? What do we get for it?
Sure. I'll
And-
skip
and
ahead then, because I
incentives.
have a slide that
some
covers
history.
that.
Some history of how we tried to be a green community and failed,
Yes.
because I think that's important.
Okay. So becoming a green community has a benefit to the town in there are a number of benefits, but the one that I think is a nice carrot is a monetary carrot. It enables us to apply as a municipality to the Department of Energy Resources for grant funding on an annual basis. It is, the funding, from my understanding, is based on our population and based on some quick research that I did to review where various similarly sized municipalities are at. They're seeing grant funding opportunities in the range of $130,000 plus on an annual basis. And now these grant funds must be used for energy-related projects. So things that relate to our reduction of fossil fuels, consumption of fossil fuel and the associated greenhouse gas emissions with that, increase of energy efficiency, so things like the energy services contract that we have undergone, development of renewable energy systems, storage, we wanted to look at battery storage and some other things, and there are some other unique things that municipalities have applied for that might not fall under this exactly these definitions, but have some relation in terms of helping a community move toward energy independence, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions ultimately. Now, this program helps us comply with the Global Warming Solutions Act, right, which is again a state regulation that indicates we have certain milestones to achieve to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And my other slide, so we can go forward, just one more thing. Oh, darn. We actually have achieved 4 of the 5 criteria already.
It was back, you had it.
It was,
like
okay,
the
good.
second slide. There you go.
Excellent. So we have done 4 of the 5, and the stretch code is the one that is really, that's left for us to adopt. And as Julian mentioned, we had tried a number of years ago to go to town meeting and see if the municipality would vote in favor to adopt this. Now, the code, the building code and the energy code was very different at that time. And so that sort of leads into this, because we are now in a very different place. We just moved into a new code that came into effect January 1st. And that is the 9th edition of the building code. And on top of that, we have the IECC, which is the Energy Conservation, the International Energy Conservation Code. And so there is now very little difference between building to the stretch code and building to this, what the basic code is by state law. So turn it over to Megan to go through some of those things.
So before, like Megan Amsler was saying, there was a big difference between the stretch code and the base code, and that caused a lot of confusion in builders, and that was kind of the impetus, I think, for a lot of people being against the stretch code. Now, what they've done is they've tried to align the two more, which makes it simpler, makes it a simpler process. The non-stretch code town, basically being a base code, you have 2 paths. You can do the prescriptive path, or the performance path. Prescriptive, it goes down the list of what your insulation values need to be for your building. The performance path, it looks at the building from more of a holistic view. And so it's not saying your roof needs to be this, your walls need to be this. It needs to test at a certain HERS rating. And so if we go with being a stretch code town, you'd eliminate the prescriptive path, and every project would be performance. And so it would need a HERS rater, and it would need to test to a HERS rating of 55. And so the differences aren't as great as before, but in Falmouth, we would be taking away one of the options. We'd no longer be doing the prescriptive. It would all need to be performance, and a HERS rater would need to be on board. One thing with the new code is that either way, prescriptive or performance, you would need to have a HERS rating, you need to have the ASHRAE, which is a ventilation test, and you would need to have your ducts tested. And so each of those tests individually cost, we've kind of gotten a range of numbers. And for a project to be with a HERS rater, the builder gets on board with the project sooner, and there's different rebates, there's different programs that the building can be put into that could help offset this added cost if we were to become a stretch code. So that's in the broadest, kind of quickest view, the bold differences between stretch code and base code. Any questions?
Very good, Sam.
Okay,
Sorry.
you said there's a cost associated with it. Do you have a working number that you're running into?
So unfortunately, Paul Raymer is also on the Energy Board, and he's out of town right now. I hate to put hard numbers in because I'm an architect, and so it's a little bit out of my purview. If we could get back to you, I could present that. I could also give you what I have, but I don't want to speak out of turn.
It'd be great to maybe forward an email.
Definitely.
With the answer to
Of
that.
course.
Any other questions, Doug?
Actually, maybe for Doug Brown, do you remember why we voted, the timing discussion as to why we didn't vote against it? I thought it was mostly the builders and contractors.
At the
concerned about it.
time, we weren't being required to do these blower door tests and testing the ductwork, which now is becoming more common anyway. And we had just had a couple of code changes previously, and we were all pulling our hair out over all the changes and the new things that were coming. So I think it was just bad timing, and also we were giving up a lot if we were going to adopt it at that time. We would have to do a lot more stuff after we had just been through a couple of big changes. So I think it's a smaller jump now, so maybe.
And that would ultimately be passed on to the customer, I would think, whatever additional time or cost might be taken.
Well, you would hope, but, a lot of times we end up eating it because it's just part of what it takes to get the job done. You're bidding competitively if it's a house, so once you've got the job, you're stuck with the costs.
And the theory is that the consumer will end up benefiting from a more efficient house.
Yes.
In the long run, that they'll be spending less money because their house will not be as expensive to heat.
Right.
in
Exactly.
theory.
And it'll just push more people into the Energy Star program where you're going to be doing the performance testing, so you might as well get the credits for it later. Not everybody does the Energy Star program because sometimes it can cause you to do things that might not be in your plan otherwise.
Sam?
But it's not just the individual homeowner or property owner, it's society as a whole. That's why we're pushing this
Right.
program, right? To get a broader participation to benefit all of us.
Is there anyone in the audience who might have a question or like to speak? Mr. Duffy?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Michael Duffney, I live in Precinct 6. I'm also a builder in Falmouth and was involved in the previous attempt to do this, and as Doug pointed out, there was a pretty big disparity at the time between what we needed to do and what we were going to be required to do. And one of the big issues that the building community was having was if you work in Falmouth, you're working under one code, one energy code. If you work in Mashpee, it's a different one. And, so we've really fought for years to try to all be on the same page with a uniform building code in the state of Massachusetts. And that's one of the reasons why we pushed back, the building community pushed back. And to Doug's point, we were actively pursuing and still do today, the most energy efficient means and methods that you can do. The current building code that was just adopted a couple of weeks ago is in fact stricter than the stretch code because they've had a difficult time stretching the stretch code any further. Typically, it was a 20% increase over what we were required to do through the base code. And so I've done a little inquiring as of late because we've been looking at the state level, we've been looking for some guidance from uptown, if you will, as to where this is going to go. Is the stretch code, is it going to be sunsetted because it has achieved its purpose and the base code through the IECC has exceeded it, or is it going to continue? And so what I'm hearing is that the word on the street now is that they are working on stretching the new base code. And if that and so that unknown piece for me is a little bit scary because right now the houses are very, very tight, very energy efficient and so forth, and we just don't know, and I don't know that anybody can tell us what it is that's coming.
When is whatever's coming? What's the timing?
It's a good question, because it's been a couple of years, they haven't done anything now, but I called a couple of folks today to see where, at the state, to see where it was, and all I could get from them was that there is movement underfoot to try to stretch the new base code.
So, but wouldn't it be, so if we were to adopt the stretch code in April, presumably, I know there may be some movement underfoot, but nothing moves very quickly in general. At that level, it takes some time. So if we were to adopt it, we would hit the 5th component for, is that correct? And then I'm presuming that if there was a change to the stretch code, you'd have to re-adopt it. Right? So I mean, potentially we could get the benefit of the green community designation, and we would have to deal with down the road if the new stretch code were changed.
Mr. Palmer, did you have any input you might want to add to that from the town's perspective, since you happen to be here?
Well, I think...
You need to come up to Mike.
Rod Palmer, Building Commissioner. I guess you'd have to go back in time. I think the stretch code originally was created, I think it was 2009, maybe 2010, something like that. So if we were to go back in time and you are a stretch community for building new homes, and that's what this is specific to, new homes. It's not alterations, it's not renovations, it's not commercial buildings unless they're 100,000 square feet or larger, I think it is. But the bar for those building new homes under the stretch code was here, back 8 or 9 years ago. And the bar for the base code was down here. So the difference, there was a marginal difference between the two. And as Mike had said, the building code, which yields to the International Energy Code, IECC 2015 right now, the prescriptive methods every few years become a little more strict. So today the bar for the HERS raters is here, the stretch code, and the bar for the base code is here. They're close to being parallel. So over time, the base code has evolved, but for those that don't completely understand the stretch code, it's the individual has to hire a HERS rater, and they use a software, an accredited software that enters all the values of the insulation within the home, the appliances, the heating system, and it has to score, I believe, 55 or less. And I think somebody had asked the cost. I think the cost is about $1,000, somewhere around $1,000, to hire this person to evaluate your home from its infancy to its certificate of occupancy. What the costs are to achieve that score of 55, I don't know. I've never had to exercise that myself. So.
Very, very helpful. Sam?
Yeah, I just wanted, we actually applied to become a green community almost 2 years ago. And we got turned down. And it was, because we had argued, and actually Mike was part of our discussion about that, we argued that our base code was so close to the stretch code that they were equivalent. But bureaucrats being what they are, they basically say, no, it's got to be the stretch code, and so then they denied our application. I wanted to come back and revisit this, because if that gap is so close and, the building community feels like it's not significant anymore, the history is that those 210 communities have gotten over $55 million in grants, and we haven't been eligible for that kind of resource to help the town pursue some of its own energy conservation efforts. And so it's just like we close ourselves off, and I was basically hoping, I think along with the Energy Committee, that, we look at it again and see whether this isn't an opportunity we don't want to keep passing up. So that's why, that's a little history. But we actually got debriefed on why we were turned down by the state.
Something else I'd like to point out is 8 or 9 years ago, even less, when folks would apply for building permits, very rarely did you see a HERS rater involved. Almost never. And today I'd say, I couldn't put a number on it, but it's probably close to 20% of the new homes that are built use HERS raters. So we see more and more of it, and I think it's because with new homes that are built today, there are requirements that weren't there years ago. There's duct blasting, there's the blow-a-door test, and that's where they pressurize the house and they measure the volume of air that escapes. So a lot of folks are yielding to these HERS raters to make their homes more energy efficient, whether or not we have a stretch code or not.
Thank you. Mr. Duffany?
I just wanted to add that once you are a stretch community and the stretch code stretches the new code again, you have to go along with that. Okay, so we're not just in, and that's, for me, that's the troubling part, is I don't have an issue with where we are today with the code and the stretch code, but the fact that when you adopt and they change the regs and they increase it, you don't have a say. You either opt out or you do it, one of the two. And there is, and I confess I don't know enough about it, but there is another alternative, another method to achieve this criteria number 5. It's not just becoming a stretch community. They do offer an alternative path, and I just think that it might be worth considering.
So I just want to clarify, but if we opted in and the stretch code became something that was too onerous on our builders in town, we then can opt out of that, correct? I mean, is that what you're telling me? I just want to make sure I understand. I mean, It has implications for the green community component of it, but I mean, it has those implications, so.
That's right. And again, that's the only piece that worries me is that you need an R49 in your attic now. If we stretch this another 20%, I mean, we are literally putting in 2x12s in the roof and fully foaming them, or we're putting other layers of foam insulation in to try to achieve that. It's just, there's a little bit of an unknown there, and that's what worries me. I have no problem with the known, so, thanks.
Thanks, and thanks for coming and giving us your viewpoint. Mark?
Mark Finneran, Precinct 6. If town meeting does vote this in, is that it? Does it go on the ballot, or it's law?
You mean if
it passes town meeting?
Article.
Yeah.
It becomes, yes.
That'll be it. It doesn't go on the ballot?
Correct.
Right.
Okay. Now, Mr. Palmer said that the price for the HERS was $1,000. I suggest by the time town meeting comes that we get some figures to what it is going to be to the average house. I mean, if you start talking about putting 12 inches of foam, I mean, that's a hell of a lot more than $1,000, and I think that we really need realistic figures, and I mean, from the building industry, not from the proponents of the article.
That's one of the reasons we're making it an early topic.
Yeah, because it can be a lot.
And I think just to clarify that he was saying the rater would be a $1,000 fee, but you're right, there are other, and I think there are other fees that would be associated with it, and that would obviously be part of the presentation that anyone gives, so.
So, Mr. Suso, for this evening, in order to consider this to come on, sorry?
I thought Megan Amsler had her hand up to respond.
Oh, come right up. But just to ask my question, in terms of timing, when the article would need to be done, or at least a placeholder put in, would we need to take any action tonight? And secondarily, would we have time to look into what the alternative to the stretch code that Mr. Duffany mentioned might be?
Well, yeah, Madam Chair, the deadline for receipt of proposed warrant articles is this Friday, January 12th, but the board would not be voting to affirm the warrant until your meeting on the 22nd. So there's a 2-week window there.
To do some research.
If we do go forward tentatively with something on.
Great. Megan?
I just wanted to comment on, because I too, Mr. Duffany, had looked into and inquired into the DOER about what is this other potential pathway, and I really got absolutely no information. It's on the website and under criteria 5, but when I dug a little bit deeper, they were like, back to the stretch code. So I would love, I don't know if Julian, if you have the ability to inquire, and perhaps you would get a little more traction, than I have found, but that it was very frustrating because it does say on criteria 5 that there are alternative ways to achieve this, but it's sort of a circular thing, which I think is unfortunate. The other point I wanted to make, to address Mr. Finneran's question as well as Mr. Duffany's about the cost of the HERS rater, is that our understanding, and we will, Megan and I will certainly dig into this and get you guys some more information to articulate the points, but it is our understanding that by going through the Energy Star program, that the cost of the HERS rater is actually covered through the rebates and incentives that come through that program. So just to address that.
It'd be great to have more information on
Okay.
that. Sam?
Yeah, I just want to say, when we were debriefed by that state
Yes.
employee, and whose name escapes me, and I don't even remember his office per se, but he was trying to be as constructive as possible, but he pretty much said we didn't have another choice other than adopting the stretch code, that there was no real another option. And he was trying to say, look, I'd really like to get you there, but you don't really have another option. So that's another source basically telling us the same thing.
Right, and I think the other components that that he was also indicating is that Falmouth had gotten, we've done a lot of picking of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, on the energy efficiency and conservation side of things, and there is a time period at which point we can no longer count those toward our goal that we have to reach under the green community criteria. And so I think that was also there to say, we need to figure this out sooner,
All right, so is it the board's desire that we ask Mr. Suso and his staff to resolve as many of these questions as possible and put this back on the next agenda for further discussion?
Well,
Sam?
There's a deadline for articles to be submitted, so I think it's appropriate for us to put a placeholder in there, and then we'll consider it on the 22nd. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more details and some information at that point and decide whether we're going to include it on the warrant or not.
Doug?
I was going to say, I would move that we do ask him to put a placeholder on, because we have enough information now to know that I think it's a good idea.
Well, I'll second his motion if he's going to make a formal motion.
For the placeholder.
Okay, all those in favor of a placeholder?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much.
Thank you for appearing, appreciate it. Okay, next we have a presentation by the town manager on the status of the wind turbines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have a PowerPoint to share with the board. That is a summary form of the status report, 15-point status report that the board has received. 14 points. Thank you, Peter. And I'll just walk through this, Madam Chair, if I may.
Please.
Wind 1 was denied an operating permit by the Zoning Board of Appeals, and that resulted in the operational shutdown of that turbine, meaning Wind 1. Wind 1 and Wind 2 were determined to be a nuisance by the Zoning Board of Appeals. That determination was subsequently appealed by the town to Superior Court. And item number 3, in a separate case, again, this is different from the case noted in number 2. In a separate case, a Superior Court jury determined that Wind 1 did not constitute a nuisance to the Anderson property. The requested damages from that property owner were denied, and I want to affirm that that court decision has no impact on the zoning or the operating permit issue for Wind 1, and that is sometimes confused. Item number 4, on appeal of the ZBA nuisance, which was just noted in item number 2 above, this was an appeal by the town. The judge affirmed the nuisance and ordered a shutdown of both wind turbines. The judge found also that there was no diminishment in property values to the properties affected, and the town has declined to appeal that judge's determination further. Number 5, a reminder that multiple additional court cases are continuing relating to both wind turbines. Number 4, that should be number 6, sorry. Notification of the court-ordered shutdowns was provided to the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. The town has financial obligations to both of those state agencies. Item 7, negotiations are underway with the Clean Water Trust and the Clean Energy Center just mentioned. We're attempting to minimize this portion of the cost impact to taxpayers from this wind turbine shutdown. Number 8, the town has had multiple contacts and discussions with representatives of Plymouth County regarding that county's possible interest in acquiring and relocating one of the town wind turbines. That Plymouth County completed their review and financial projections and decided not to proceed with a potential acquisition. Item 9, the town has been in periodic but regular contact with representatives of Vestas, the manufacturer of the 2 Vestas V83 turbines, Wind 1 and Wind 2. Those contacts include providing for periodic maintenance of the turbines, exploring the potential interest in turbine disposition, and the potential acquisition by a third party. Item number 10, Building Commissioner transmitted a letter to a private complainant advising that the town is being requested to, quote, prepare and submit to me, meaning to the Building Commissioner, a plan for Wind 1 dismantling and removal from its present location, and a request that that same plan be submitted again to the Building Commissioner by May 31st, 2018, unquote. Item 11, this relates to Wind 1. The formal denial of an operating permit for Wind 1 has resulted in the town being unable to place Wind 1 into operation under any circumstance. Wind 1 does not have a special permit to operate under the old zoning bylaw. Wind 1 does not meet the conditions required to apply for a special operating permit under the new zoning bylaw. It has been determined, that again is Wind 1, has been determined to be a nuisance and ordered shut down by a court. The Building Commissioner, as noted, has directed the town to submit a plan for disposition by May 31st of this year. Item number 12, on to Wind 2. The status of Wind 2 is different than that of Wind 1. Given the circumstances, Wind 2 will not operate again at its present location. There is a possibility that Wind 2 can be relocated by special permit from the planning board under the new zoning bylaw. It does not need to be considered for dismantling or disposition at this time until an appropriate plan for the disposition can be developed. Relocating Wind 2 is only an option. The town must comprehensively assess the situation. Any potential alternative location must address multiple issues, including impact on nearby property and residents. Point number 13. The wind turbines represent a very significant capital investment by Falmouth taxpayers and retain considerable residual value, which the town must responsibly analyze and manage. Point 14. Proper review and analysis of multiple complex alternatives and issues will necessarily require the professional assistance of a qualified engineering consultant or consultants. I recommend to the board that you so authorize a qualified consultant or consultants to be engaged by the town manager for this purpose. And that concludes my status recommendations to the board, Madam Chair.
That's a very comprehensive report. I know the board is grateful to have its options spelled out and to really delineate what is before the board for consideration and what is not. Questions from the board?
No.
Well, one of the things I wanted to address tonight is that we've gotten a number of emails and opinions from many folks. I know that Mark wanted to make a suggestion last time, and we're prepared tonight to hear any suggestions. Mark, if you might want to come up. And the suggestions that we have already received by email, we are reviewing. The town manager has been making a file for, to essentially be provided to any consultant that the board may hire, and to get some expert advice on, for further public discussion and further decision by the board. Mark?
Mark Fitteran, Precinct 6. When you do put this plan together, I'd just like to point out a couple of things. First off, our first responders have spots in this town that they've never had radio communication with. To maintain the towers themselves with the nacelles off them could alleviate that problem, which they've wanted for years. And I mean, it could at some point turn into a very dangerous situation when they have no communication. Secondly, Mr. Shearer brought up that there's no cell phone communication in West Falmouth. This also could be solved by mounting a cell phone repeater or whatever it is on the towers. And thirdly, I have a friend who rents space on his tower out, and he related to me that for the top unit on his tower, he gets $4,500 a month, and he has about 6 of them total, and I'm sure the revenue is lesser the lower they go in the size of the repeater. But with 2 towers there, I mean, we're talking about potentially well over $100,000 a year. So I'd just like you to keep in mind that if you do get rid of the wind turbines themselves, to maintain those towers and use them and at least get a little revenue back and solve a couple of problems for taxpayers and, most importantly, for our first responders. I think it's something that you shouldn't forget and keep in mind. Thanks.
Appreciate that. Megan?
I think Mark's comment just, prompts me to make a comment that is just my own personal comment, doesn't represent the board certainly in any way, which is that the part that I think is most frustrating, I know for me, and I think for a lot of individuals I know because they contact me and let me know, is that, Mark just in a few minutes raised a couple of problem-solving possibilities. Obviously, everything would have to be vetted. But it's that particular mindset where we're trying to minimize really the detriment from this situation for the town, maximize in whatever way it ends up being, whether it's having to relocate it somewhere down the line once a lot of work is done, or turning it into something that benefits the town in terms of access for first responders or cell phone reception. It's that particular mindset of trying to solve a problem in a way that benefits the community that we really need. I know we heard throughout this very long period of time, we heard over and over again that if the wind turbines stopped spinning, that's all that mattered, and that the litigation would go away, and that was the main concern, was the harm that people were experiencing from the turbines spinning. And this board weighed that along with the cost of litigation very heavily against the fact that many in this town, we know because of votes, endorsed these turbines continuing to run. And that was an incredibly hard and difficult, and frankly, I think, I don't want to use the word brave because that's giving too much to it, but it was an important decision that this board made. It was disagreed with by many, but it was a decision that this board made to weigh all of those competing interests. And instead of a response being that helped to bring the community together to problem solve around what remains some real issues, Mark raised them, financial. There are financial components of this that this board and town manager and his office continues to work very hard along with our legislative representatives to minimize the costs. But there are real costs to this that have dollar signs. Not beyond that, there are other costs about green energy, climate change, but there are hard and fast numbers to this. And instead of the community coming together, we are now being faced with sort of the bar being ratcheted up to incur what would be yet another cost to dismantle the turbine before we've even really had time to come up with, are there some other potential possibilities that benefit our community? So I really hope going forward that the mindset is more in line with what Mark is expressing tonight. Yes, I'm saying this, Mark, that is more in line with what you're expressing, and that we are looking to problem solve, because the money that has been spent on this capital investment and that will continue to be spent no matter what happens is significant, and it's money that is used for this expenditure that can't be used for all the other very important needs that the town has, for schools, for infrastructure, for coastal resiliency, for our aging senior population, for economic development. So the path that we're going down now, I think, is going to require the community coming together to minimize this, the financial impact, maximize whatever we can out of what the situation that we currently have. And I just hope that rather than a pushing of the envelope, that we really take time to allow this community, by taking input from individuals, and we hope that you continue to provide that input, that we can make a plan going forward that is, making the best of what has been a very difficult, complicated, and long-term challenge for the community. So I thank you, Mark, for kicking off what is, I hope, a problem-solving, endeavor for our community.
Megan, I think you really said exquisitely what it takes in many situations where there are opposing opinions and opposing sides, and where each side has to move and come together a little bit, and I think that's where we're at. I want to focus a little bit, since we have town council here, just on this question. The building commissioner's letter had said dismantling and removal plan. Frank, would we need to take any action by way of a further request, or if it made more sense to repurpose part of the turbine, as Mark was saying, if it became a cell tower structure? I don't even know if engineering-wise that would be possible. But would we need to, for example, appeal the building commissioner's directive now to make sure that would be an option in the future? And the only reason I ask, without having an engineering report, is because there are time deadlines on appeal. So number one, is this directive in the form of an order that would need appealing? And if so, what would be the process in timing for the board?
Well, we have, Mr. Suso and I, perhaps others, have talked about this process, and it recognized that the problem here from a zoning point of view is the wind turbine. If you take the wind turbine off the pole, you no longer have a wind turbine. And the pole itself is governed by another provision of the zoning bylaw. So I have urged for some time now that we take a look at repurposing some of those towers, just as Mr. Finneran has also suggested. And for that, I think you need some kind of a consultant or an engineer to tell you what these things could be used for. I personally do not know. Now, you have to consider that you have towers there. They're pretty tall. I think they're 80 meters tall. That's taller than anything we have right now. The other thing is that they're in proximity to the air base, but they've been permitted by the FAA. So you've got a huge hurdle that you've already passed. So there may be some value to those.
But in terms of clarification of the building commissioner's
well, I think,
order.
I don't think you necessarily have to appeal his decision. Perhaps you could send him a letter and ask him if he could be more and interpret it for you or clarify that.
Take a letter, Maria. Ask but maybe it would be advisable to do that just at this preliminary stage. Mr. Suso.
Happy to do that if the board would so ordain.
So I was just going to say, I don't know if we need a motion, but.
All those in favor of asking for clarification from the building commissioner on the idea of repurpose or something that the town council would suggest?
I'm sure it's all that necessary. I mean, the message says to a plan for its Wind 1 dismantling removal. Wind 1 is the whole turbine electronic system.
That sounds like a legal argument,
Right.
Mr. Jones. We can avoid legal arguments through initial clarification, perhaps, but you make a good point. In which case, I will take the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. Grant?
Thank you, Grant Walker, Precinct 3. I'm just asking if Mr. Suso's report, is that going to be available online, or could that be made available?
Do you mean the PowerPoint that he presented tonight,
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
I think
You want
that
It will be.
That would be very
It
helpful.
will be, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Grant, you want a copy?
Was there someone else in the audience that wanted to be heard? Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? Megan?
I was just wondering if it would be helpful to outline going forward. I know some folks always wonder, we had a question about when the appropriate time for comments and things like that will be, and I just, you know, this will be an ongoing conversation. Maybe we can just let folks know when they'll be able to weigh in.
So tonight was the opportunity for the beginning of the comments. We appreciate Mark's and the opportunity for the board to hear that and discuss it. Going forward, you'll see the turbine discussion described on the agenda, and that will likely be attached to specific ideas going forward. For example, the cell tower idea, and the goal will be toward the board's decision as to what kind of expert advice or consultant we may hire going forward to further advise us and problem solve in terms of the repurpose of Win 1 and also just complying with the building commissioner's order going forward.
So I would like to make a motion to support the town manager's request that we authorize him to find a qualified either firm or a consultant to start looking into this. I mean, I think if we're going to actually have a plan of action, it's going to remove them. If we just go straight with that, it's going to take some money. And we need to know how much that's going to be or what can possibly be. So I think we need to move forward in getting an engineer or a consultant to tell us what could happen and what can we do.
And for them, we're right now just, I think, looking at the order for Win 1. So just to clarify for the public, there is, the building commissioner's order is with respect to Win 1, and the town manager's report suggested that the board should look at the possibility of relocating Win 2, and that would be something that's separate. So
if we're going to hire a consultant, I wouldn't want to limit their only looking at Win 1, because I think there just may be some questions that are similar enough to say, if you can give us a recommendation within the same contract about some aspects of Win 2, I would love to know that also. So I wouldn't want to limit to say, just look there, but that's the purpose of why we're hiring them, is to look at when Win 1 can happen.
Megan?
And I agree with Doug that it has to be somewhat timely, because we need to respond to the building commissioner with some proposed plan by May 31st. And a huge component of any plan is going to be, feasibility, cost, all of that. So before we can really even think about the many different things we could do, we need that expert opinion on, is it doable at all, and if so, at what cost?
So it sounds like we'd be running a sort of a two-prong approach, where we're hiring a consultant to review ideas, and we're also taking ideas at the same time. I think from the community for discussion and kind of continuing to roll that into the description of the expert's job.
Well, I think I don't know that it's so much the description of the expert's job, but I think, the folks in this community have lived with the turbines for a while. They also know some of the other needs of the community. So I think that, that input, however it comes in, whenever it comes in, is also always something that we can pass on, and it can inform part of what the consultant does. I mean, the consultant's overall, I think the town manager, along with whatever input we give him, will structure what, the ask is of that consultant. The scope, thank you. But certainly, I think it's helpful to provide any public input we get to that consultant and see if these are ideas that are, they have any legs.
Doug?
I think we should give some guidance. We want to see if it's practical to relocate Win 2 to another place on the treatment facility. We want to see if it's practical to use Win 1 tower as a cell phone tower or another communications tower. And then, other than that, if he wants to bring suggestions from other projects that he's seen in the past of, what it costs to take a wind turbine down. I don't know if the one we get will have any experience, but, and then on a third note, maybe he could vet future ideas. I don't know how we would put that into a RFP, but that he would be kind of on call to answer other questions? I don't know, is that a possibility?
Well, for example, is there any other place in town where they could be located and not have the same impact?
We looked at that with the wind timber and option process group already.
As far as reuse of the Wind One tower, I mean, actually meteorological data may actually be valuable too. There may be people who would like to get, meteorological data on that tower, perhaps even the base, because, predicting weather and monitoring weather and predicting air traffic control issues and what have you, it may be somebody else would like to lease access to that tower. So I would not exclude it. I would not, focus it just on communication.
That could be another lease opportunity.
Yeah.
Can I just ask for the town manager? I mean, you would create with the assistant town manager an RFP, correct, for what we're looking for, and so.
Well, it might not come up to that level. I mean, we kind of have to determine a
where,
cost.
right.
We would want to structure a proposal, and my fundamental question is whether it can include both Wind 1 and Wind 2 as direction from the board.
Well, I guess I'm just a little bit concerned. I think I agree with Doug, you don't want to, cut off someone's ability to give you a sense, but if someone gives us a sense about what we can do with Wind 1, it's the same thing we can do with Wind 2 in terms of what we can put up on the top. I mean, I think they can just look at Wind 1 for the time being. The idea of relocating Wind 2 to somewhere else, that's a much more extensive, in my opinion, assessment, much more extensive review. I mean, there's a lot more that goes on there that I don't think anyone would get done by May 30 in time for us to give, and we don't have to do anything with that by May 31st.
Sam?
But you could have two deadlines, one for Wind 1 and one for Wind 2, and have it under the same contract. So.
And I guess,
Doug.
on the ideal world, if it turns out actually moving Wind 1 to someplace else not in Falmouth ends up not being that huge a cost, say, well, then that's a pretty great solution for Wind 2 also. And so I'm just saying we don't shut our eyes to the information we get.
Right.
I think you're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
The only, I think that might push us into the RFP limit as opposed to or maybe we can separate any thoughts from?
Well, I'd just like to explore that generally. Peter may have a comment as well. We want to work with our procurement officer, Finance Director Jennifer Petit. But I think it depends upon how you frame this. If it's being limited and cannot include any information on potential relocation, then I think it's a different analysis than if it's just one that looks at repurposing the existing structures.
Right, that's my problem with the scope. It's a very loosey-goosey. But Peter, did you have some thoughts?
I mean, nothing really definitive. I think, I would want to reserve judgment and take a real close look at the procurement because the shorthand terminology that we use for the different statutes that apply for procurement, goods and services is 30B, and building construction is Chapter 149, and then there are different rules for building construction, vertical versus horizontal. And typically what vertical means is a building, and this is vertical, but it's not a building. So, and engineering, and the reason that's important is because engineering for horizontal construction is exempt. So you don't have to go through an RFP, you don't have to bid it.
I guess.
So we would need to take a look at that, but the one thing that I would say in terms of the scope is obviously much larger if you want to look at relocating Wind 2, but there is a lot of overlap and synergy between the two, so probably, even if it means, a higher procurement threshold, you probably do want to work with one consultant to do the whole thing. And you can time it, you can phase it however you want. You can prioritize Wind 1 for May, but you probably do want to use that same consultant. And if you short circuit the procurement, then you can't go back to that consultant again for the second phase unless you go.
I guess what I'd like to do, it seems like we're really just trying to do this in one shot, and it's such a big, complicated issue that we have a couple of months to deal with. I guess I'd like to see if Mr. Jones would consider amending his motion to a direction to the town manager to present the board with scope of work for a consultant for vote for the next meeting. Would that be helpful, Mr. Suso?
Madam Chair.
Well, I just want to ask the question.
Well, I would take whatever direction the board would care to give.
Okay. It's just
But I think all we're doing is authorizing the town manager to actually investigate a consultant contract, and it would have to come back to us to approve the scope anyway. So I don't think that.
That's what I'm asking
we're
for.
necessary. Yeah.
I think that's my intention of my motion was to
Exactly. So I
send them in
think
that direction.
Good.
eventually the details will have to be approved because we're going to be authorizing expenditure of money. Right?
So we might want even two plans, one, with a smaller scope, one with a bigger scope. That might be helpful for discussion as well. In which case, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is that enough direction?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Grant? Sure.
I know we can email our ideas to you about this, and in the meetings when the turbines are on the agenda, will you be accepting comments or questions about the turbines and whatever?
Yes, we will. It'll be on the agenda and will be, it's probably going to be a little less often because now we're kind of giving the work to a consultant. But as the consultant is discussed, we certainly will be taking public comment on that. Mark?
Thank you.
Mark Finneran, Precinct 6. I think this was pretty much in one of Julian's numbered proposals, but there are numerous locations in this country where these things are, for want of, properly situated. One might just inquire directly with those, because they may know the value of these things used, and they may be interested in purchasing it, or at the very least, coming and taking it down for free and taking it away.
That's a good point. I think what you're referencing in terms of Julian's report is that there, we did try that with Plymouth County and also contacted the manufacturer directly on asking for such information. The town manager can certainly clarify that.
Because you would think somebody would want them that already has them, and we've seen pictures of, farms with hundreds of them. I mean, they must have maintenance issues.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Next, we have, I guess we're all the way to individual selectmen's reports. Doug?
Nothing big happening this week for me?
Sam?
No, the weather took care of my week.
Any Irish bar that?
No, just barely recovering from the jet lag. No, I would say, one thing, Solid Waste Advisory is doing some work. They're starting some work on trying to do a bylaw around recycling. So I just hope if people are interested, keep an eye out for the agendas. And, if people have ideas, they should come to those meetings.
And Linda Davis has been publishing them in the Enterprise as
Yes,
well.
and so, a really important topic, and, the more input, the better, but it's something that that committee is trying to put together. So other than that, no, nothing to report.
Doug?
Just a future agenda item I'd like for us to discuss either at the next meeting or possibly the meeting after. This came up with our operating budget and with talking to the fire chief about using the proper usage of our fire stations and really how we can either do some consolidation or even going back to consideration of the Hatchville station. I just think it's time to start on that process of working through our town and working through our capital budget to see where we fall with that. So I'd like to start that process in another meeting or so.
Great suggestion.
Sue, if I could just say, if I could add to that, that was part of my comment from the last meeting, and I think it really is time. I know we were talking about an operating budget, but that's connected to it. I mean, capital, build-outs like that impact your operating budget, and I totally agree with Doug that I think it's time to start having that conversation. I think it would be a great great thing for an upcoming agenda to start having the conversation about those larger, that kind of vision.
When we're looking at water projects
Yes,
and that
yeah.
came up.
And we know we have a limited window.
Sam?
And I hope that we look at it from the standpoint of enhancing quality of service. Because I think that's what we're missing. People are fighting to hang on to something because they think they're going to get something less. But my sense is that we may very well be able to come up with something that actually provides more effective service to assist people whenever public safety issues arise.
And I know
So-
that the fire chief has been really focused on that, and I think
It's an important idea.
we might
and
start
input.
with, perhaps if you can see if the fire chief might have time on the next, or the agenda thereafter, to start that discussion.
Sure, I guess I just want to clarify, are we talking about building a new fire station? Or are we talking about utilizing the existing physical assets, better utilizing what we have now?
All options.
One is a long-term, major capital expense. Another is a shorter-term, more efficient utilization of existing taxpayer funds.
Let's have a long-term plan. It might include a little bit of both.
My intent was to look at both pictures, and both what can we do in the next 2 years, and maybe what are we going to do in 5 or 6 years,
Or 10 years.
or 10.
I mean, I think it's a significant department in this town. We know that there are needs connected to it. It's a big-ticket department, as it is in any town, and so I think it warrants a closer review. We've kind of done that with committees, making sure people come in, present the committees, raising that level of awareness about what work the committees are doing. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to have that kind of drill down, closer look at a really significant department that we know has some, needs, both short and long term. So I think it would be a good exercise.
Very good, thank you.
And, let's see, town manager's report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. As you're aware, the 2 large trees in front of Town Hall were successfully removed during the past week for relocation to the new water filtration facility. And just a subset of that, as you've noted, a portion of the historic fountains that go back to the late 1890s have been placed at the entrance to the water filtration facility. Those have been in storage for well over many decades at the Long Pond plant in anticipation of this opportunity. And so my thanks to all the good stewards in the water department, public works directors over the years, including our current public works director, Ray Jack, for their stewardship that has resulted in those important historic structures being saved, which allow this to go forward. And there is a second piece to this, so stay tuned. That has not been fully installed as yet, but it is an extraordinary opportunity and ties well to Falmouth's history in a way that other communities are not always able to do. So it's very gratifying to see. Also, I want to extend my compliments to Public Works, Police, and Fire for their excellent collaborative work during this past Thursday's winter storm event. Falmouth was significantly less impacted than many other areas. That was not only due to the weather, but due in part to the extraordinary work of our major responders to those emergencies, to those storm emergencies, and I want to thank them all for their tireless work. And also, as the board is aware, over this past weekend, we had 2 significant mainline water breaks. Sadly, given the recent spate of weather and now the thawing which is occurring, there is a high likelihood there will be others. But I know I was personally visited our water crews during their work. While I was not with them on Friday night, I was with them on a part of the day on Saturday and visited, and the board, of course, is fully aware of the temperatures and weather conditions, and a tip of the hat to them and my thanks to them for their extraordinary work under very, very difficult conditions of Mother Nature and successful repairs. So we thank them for that. And just a reminder, the board's next meeting is on Monday, January 22nd, your next regular meeting. We do have, again, to remind, the deadline for receipt of proposed warrant articles is this Friday, January 12th. On the 22nd, this board will be voting to affirm those proposed warrant articles that are ultimately will be placed on the town meeting warrant. That is the determination fully of the Board of Selectmen, and we look forward to that. I also would anticipate, Madam Chair, I know you and I have been talking about this, and I have suggested that to some members of the board as well, that if all goes well, there might be a discussion of proposed priorities for the Board of Selectmen at your meeting on the 22nd. That does not mean you need to vote to accept them, but beginning the discussion of that, which comes on the heels of the evaluation process. So we look forward to that unfolding as well. And that concludes my report.
Great. I just, Peter and then Doug?
I just wanted to mention you had suggested that we put the Charter Review Committee report on the website, and I did a search on the website, and in fact is on the website already. So kudos to the webmasters.
Great. Doug?
I just wanted to back up on what Mr. Suso said about the DPW and this weather weekend. I can't imagine a harder situation where you're having lots of rain and slush followed by a deep, deep freeze. And I know in my own driveway, I decided not to plow because I thought that slush was actually going to be easier to drive on than wet surface that turned into glass ice. And how you make those decisions, okay, if you put down sand on, or salt on ice, it then melts into a sheen, which becomes more slippery than the ice itself. If it's cold enough, you put sand down, the traction doesn't do any good. And it's just the decisions you have to make when the situation there, it just isn't going to work very well. And I thought the roads I traveled, I couldn't believe how well they did work. I know side roads may have been harder, but I was just very impressed that they were able to come up with a plan, given how very, very cold it got after the amount of precipitation we had that wasn't snow. Snow actually is much, much easier than what we had to deal with.
Than the tundra, the freeze.
In dealing with a water main break when it's, sub-zero temperatures and the ground is
Awful conditions.
So.
Madam Chair, could I make one corollary comment to that,
Yes.
if I may? I want to also thank all the non-public safety employees in the town. They reported for work on Thursday. Many town halls throughout the Commonwealth, some got much worse weather than we did, of course, but many also on the Cape were closed. And so if residents needed help, they had to come another day. But I just want to thank my colleagues here at Town Hall and all the other non-public safety employees throughout the town. They were all here on Thursday. As the storm worsened and darkness was going to be approaching, I did authorize department heads to begin to allow employees to leave a little bit early. So many began to leave around the 3 o'clock hour. But again, they were here, did a yeoman's job. They retained their normal dedication and work ethic, and I'm very proud of the job that they conducted in support of taxpayers. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that and thank them as well.
I echo that, and I just also want to mention it's a tough judgment call for management. And I want to say that the right call was made. And obviously, I mean, you're complimenting the staff for, their commitment, but I think the leadership should also be complimented in terms of your decision to, keep those services going. And I think that really played through to exactly what Mr. Jones and Ms. Braga were saying. So appreciate that as well. I do want to make actually two announcements on correspondence. One is a long-time Finance Committee member, and Gary Anderson has announced his reluctant end to his volunteering at the retirement board. And so I know Mr. Suso will be looking for a placement soon, but I do want to thank Mr. Anderson. He's volunteered in so many capacities in town, but is spending a little too much time in Florida, I understand, right now, but for good reasons. And then just a kind of a preview, we are having another joint meeting on Saturday. The board's well aware. We'll have, I believe it's planning, zoning, health, probably the building commissioner will be there. Conservation. And, one of the things we're going to talk about is how do the boards coordinate, with each other in terms of if there is a hearing or a topic that a board may want the Board of Selectmen to, kind of read in on or give a view, and where are those, where are the proper places, what's the proper way to do that? And so, when we see this line item on the agenda, review or discuss correspondence received, I want to be sure when we get a notice about, for example, a hearing coming before planning or ZBA, first of all, I want to make sure we're getting those notices as they wish us to and as we properly should, and that, we get a little packet of information from which we can base an opinion that may be sought of us, or where, the citizens may wish us to weigh in on, and also give another forum for folks to just have that communication and know those issues are out there. You don't always get to see the moment when it's advertised or get that notice. So that'll be coming up on the joint session. Doug?
And I was just going to say that when we do get those ZBA notices, it's up to us to go upstairs and read the packet and understand it.
Oh, yeah, but I want to talk about facilitating that a little bit.
Okay.
But certainly, you make that good point, because there really isn't enough time for us to coordinate as a board.
Right.
And so I want to facilitate that, and also to the board members that will be attending the joint session, if you do have any other suggestions or questions you want to see as agenda items, please forward that along. Megan?
And that's for the 27th.
27?
Correct,
Yes.
Saturday
Okay.
the 27th.
It scared me for a minute when you said Saturday.
Oh, sorry, I'm thinking ahead, but yeah, good point.
It is a Saturday,
It is
yes,
a
it's a
Saturday.
Saturday.
It's a Saturday.
Last Saturday in January.
Great.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Green Harbor Waterfront Lodging is nestled in a woodland setting on a picturesque ocean inlet. Green Harbor offers a family waterfront vacation. Enjoy our private boating beach with dock, rowboats, and paddle boats, oversized heated outdoor pool, and kiddie pool. Relax in our waterfront and beachside accommodations. 548-4747 or gogreenharbor.com. Carlson Printing for all your printing needs. 508-548-7303 or toll free at 1-800-696-7303. Our email address is carlsonprinting@aol.com. Carlson Printing for all your printing needs.